My fellow Kenyans, mambo mkoaje? Leo kwa dakika chache nataka to discuss kitu ambacho kinaendelea katika ulimwengu wa siasa Kenya. It's a big, confusing, contradicting happening. On the 10th of May, all media houses zilikuwa na big splash titles. Gachagua, big win, but no celebration. Many big newspapers. What Gachagua case files reveals about new court battles with the spotlight on Kindiki. Gachagua, unakumbuka, alikuwa impeached. Sasa baada impeachment akaenda kotini kutaka haki zaidi. I have a different analysis on this before we go deep and deeper. I feel and I think Ruto has got a hand in this, Gachagua's new developments. I think and I feel Ruto has a hand in Gachagua's recent win at the court. I feel and I think Ruto, the president, wants Gachagua to run for the president. He wants Gachagua in the ballot in 2027. Ask me why, and this is my answer. He wants to split the opposition. He has to make sure the opposition is in pieces. Because I'm very sure when Gachagua amekuwa declared to run for the presidency, take it from me, he will never give it to anyone else, that position. He will tell Matiang'i and Kalonzo, support me, ndo niko na numbers. For sure, hakosi 5 million votes. Mark this, only in one region, that is the Mulima, 5 million. It cannot make him the president. Matiang'i naye atasema hapana, mimi pia niko na vote yangu wapi? Kisii nitasimama. Kalonzo kawaida atasimama. So we'll have three presidential candidates in the opposition, while Ruto will be alone. That is a point for Ruto. 1. 2, none of them will get 50+1. So kutakuwa na rerun. Rerun, it is number 2 and number 1. So number 2 ni nani? Ni Gachagua. Good. Here comes the mathematics now. Ruto will change the story, and this will be 40+1. So one community against 40 communities. Na hapo ndipo Gachagua ataumia. Kalonzo ataka angalie happy. Acha nipita katikati yao. He will come back to who? To Ruto. And that's how Ruto, he will be re-elected. Now, before we go further, yesterday I was watching KTN, and our senior political advocate, lawyer, a son of Kilifi, Honorable George KITHI, alikuwa moto sana kuhusu kesi hii ya Gachagua kotini. Hebu tumsikize kwa undani, kwa sababu this brother of ours is speaking in tongues.
To contextualize why we're here and how we got here. During an election, the president and the deputy are joined to the hip, and therefore they have one ticket, the UDA ticket. What it will mean is that they ought to enjoy presidency of term of 5 years together. And that's what was presented to Kenyans. When they were voted into office, they ought to have stayed within the run of the term, but they didn't, because there was friction, there was political disagreements that went live until such a situation where they countermanded each other in public. And fast forward, yes, the deputy president was deposed of his office or from his office. through a process that's quasi-political, quasi-judicial, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And he was impeached. Fast forward to what is obtaining today will be that as the impeachment process was ongoing before Parliament or both houses, Gachagua went to court, and the public, members of the public, went to court too. About 6 or 7 cases were filed in various cases which were brought together, meaning they were consolidated.
Yeah.
The most important one that we should highlight is the Kurugoya one. The Kurugoya court stayed or stopped the process of impeachment by the, by Parliament. The Kerugoya High Court file was moved from Kerugoya to Nairobi, consolidated with the other files, and then there was an importation of the empaneling of the bench, meaning judges to be appointed to hear the case.
Yeah.
Ordinarily, they are uneven judges, meaning they're either 3, 5, or 7. The minimum of 3 was appointed at that time, and the empanelment was done by Deputy Chief Justice Muilu. The Constitution and the law provides for close the powers of empanelment, administrative empanelment of judges to the Chief Justice.
Okay.
So that's the facts. So the obtaining question here would be, if a function can be discharged by the Chief Justice, can the deputy discharge that function? I repeat, if a function can be discharged by the Chief Justice, can the deputy Chief Justice discharge that function? Now, I'll give you probably an analogy to that.
Okay.
The instant one will be, if the president can appoint a cabinet, can the deputy president appoint a cabinet? And the answer to the question will be no, the deputy president can't appoint ministers or cabinet.
Okay.
Reason is, it was specifically provided for as a function of the president. And that brings the question of what you call jurisdiction or powers as donated by law. The powers donated by law to empanel a bench or to appoint judges to hear a case is given to the Chief Justice. I think the interpretation by the Deputy Chief Justice then, if she consulted, and how she was convinced, is that because she's deputizing the Chief Justice, she can then discharge the function of the Chief Justice as a deputy. But then there are issues that come to the fore. Does it mean that the Deputy Chief Justice can assume the office of a Chief Justice? One, does the law separate the function of a Chief Justice and a deputy? And number 3 is, can you then act in the context of a Chief Justice if the Chief Justice is not there? And the answer is no. Because a Chief Justice is a substantive office and a Deputy Chief Justice a substantive office. The law pronounces itself on what the Chief Justice should do. The law pronounces itself on what the Deputy Chief Justice should do. Now here is the law. If something is not said, then it's omitted. I repeat, if something is not said by the law, then it's omitted. In fact, deliberately omitted. And therefore, if the law does not say your powers as a Deputy Chief Justice shall include appointing judges to a bench if the Chief Justice is not there, if that is not said, then you can't interpret it to be said. So if the law is silent, then you can't impute substance on silence. Which means this, that if the law is quiet on something, especially on powers of a public officer, the public officer has no obligation whatsoever to clothe himself with powers not donated directly by the law. If you claw back and say, what then is the import of the court saying the Deputy Chief Justice did not have powers or jurisdiction to appoint the bench, it means as a time, because what happened is when the Kurugoya court case or file came to Nairobi, before the 3 judges, it had orders within it that were saying you cannot continue with the impeachment process. The 3 judges had not been appointed then. When they appointed, they presided over the decision of the Kurugoya court, which was interim in nature as at the time. And they said, no, they can proceed. So they basically set aside or removed the order. Meaning, therefore, if the 3 bench was illegally constituted and therefore illegitimate to preside over to make the decision to remove the judge, the orders of Kerugoya Court. The orders of Kerugoya Court ought to have subsisted. In fact, they ought to be subsisting now. Which means, therefore, that the process of impeachment was therefore illegal to the extent of the pronouncement of the Court of Appeal. The entire process.
Okay.
And this is what we say in law. If the process is invalid, the substance becomes invalid. Meaning, therefore, procedure is the handmaiden of law. Procedure is handmaiden of substance. Meaning, therefore, if the procedure is not followed, the substance is vulgarized, becomes illegitimate.
Okay.
And subsequently, what it means is the entire process subsequent to the appointment of the 3 judges by Mwilu was illegitimate, and we fall back to what happened before that illegitimate thing or act was committed. Meaning, we are going to where there were orders that do not impeach or proceed with impeachment. What it follows, therefore, even subsequent acts of appointment of a deputy president, because there ought to have been impeachment before the appointment of a deputy president.
Okay.
Even that act is illegitimate and illegal.
Okay.
So what is obtaining now, factually, would be that we have a deputy president sitting in office that is illegitimate or is seen to be legitimate by the law as matters stand. Remember, this decision can go to the Supreme Court and overturned. The Court of Appeal decision can go to the Supreme Court and overturned, and they can adopt the decision of the High Court, or they can stand with the decision of the Court of Appeal.
Okay.
And we hope, from legal practitioners' point of view, we hope that it goes to the Supreme Court so we sort out this thing once and for all, because there will be the question of what then is ultimate, the settled law in the context of Supreme Court. But it's more interesting. It gets more interesting because if you leave the Court of Appeal and go to the Supreme Court, you meet the CJ there and you meet the DCJ there to make a decision over a matter that they're conflicted in. One had powers, or is said to have powers, and one exercised power that is said not to have had the powers. So it even becomes more convoluted when it gets to the Supreme Court. And I would love to see how they behave themselves in that context. But coming back to what is more interesting to Kenyans will be, is Professor Kindiki properly in office? And what happens to him? There are questions that are obtaining in law as to whether he's legally in office. But of course, until this issue is settled, I think there will be the issue of public interest as to whether he can continue to occupy office, because somebody has to be there to discharge office. Again, it is impossible now with the decibels, political decibels that we see today, to have Rigathi Gachagua go occupy that office. In fact, because factually it's impossible. By law, it looks like theoretically possible, but in fact it is impossible. Okay. Now, when you come to the obtaining situation now in law, in court, what should be the expectation? The expectation ought to be that the 3 bench is reconstituted, 3 judges are appointed afresh.
Different ones?
Yes, okay. Apart from those 3 that were already appointed by, say, illegally appointed by the Chief Justice, the Deputy Chief Justice. Yeah. Now it has to be done by the Chief Justice exercising her rightful powers, so that then the process of impeachment starts, the process of hearing where the impeachment process was legally instituted starts afresh. The result will be either to say it was the impeachment process would have continued properly, or was not properly anchored in law. Now, but that is not the end. There's still another problem.
Okay.
The other problem is, notwithstanding what the court says, whether it was right or wrong, it has already invalidated the previous process that removed Gachagua. Either way, therefore, whether a new bench is constituted to make a determination, the first bench did not make did not have powers to make a determination at all. So if the impeachment process already determined, such as that Professor Kindiki was appointed into office, that one has to be set aside completely by default of the pronouncement of the Court of Appeal. Okay. It therefore illegitimizes the occupier of the office to continue occupying it. So we must have a new process and set off afresh. And if he says you can now impeach, they have to impeach afresh. unless then, in the circumstances, a court adopts the impeachment that happened and therefore differs with what the Court of Appeal has said, which can only be done by the Supreme Court. Although I've said, at the Supreme Court, we have a problem.
Mtazamaji, umeelewa ama umefloat? I hope umeelewa vile siasa inachezwa katika national level. This is MTV. Subscribe, support us, share with us the content, share with us comments. Maze, support him, maze. Thank you so much for the 1,700 subscribers, which have given me 100,000 views so far. Lakini bado, my watch hour is still chini sana. I need support. Let's view, share these things, share out to friends. Let us grow together.
He was hard, and the return was negative. He didn't get what he was asking for. But he's supposed to be heard again. So he has a chance to be heard again because a new bench is going to be constituted. But let me put it this way.
Yeah.
That question will be answered in the context of when there's competition and friction between law and politics. Politics ordinarily is dominant because it speaks immediately, reacts immediately, and it has the highest decibels. The law is quiet and silent only in a text. So whereas politics will flip in the air, it will make so much noise. When the dust settles, it is the law that ordinarily eventually dominates and then creates the space for the sobriety of what will be the relationship and the rights of people eventually.
Okay.
So to the extent that
what is otherwise called reason.
Yes.
Yeah, reason.
So to the extent that there was the political decibel at the highest and ethnicity and all the madness that we saw at the time, we knew that everybody would succumb to the politics of the day as opposed to the law. But the law took its time. It took months. It took months and months, but it has pronounced itself in a manner as to vulgarize the political process as was then. So what I believe is the rule of law may not have immediate results, but consequently, if pursued to the latter, it provides the results.
So can he vie for a political seat at the moment?
You see, the impeachment didn't happen.
Okay.
It didn't happen because the court that stopped the impeachment, the setting aside of the orders against the impeachment was illegal. So we only stopped to the extent that there were orders that stopped the impeachment process. And therefore, it doesn't mean that if the Kerugoya court, for instance, with orders that impeachment should not take place, had been had, maybe it will have allowed impeachment process to go on. But we didn't get to that because we saw events where a bench of 3 judges took over the hearing of the matter, assumed jurisdiction over the matter, presided over the matter, and made a decision now seemingly set aside, seemingly vulgarized by the decision.
Okay.
Let me not use vulgarized because, you know, I'm a lawyer, I always go to those courts. So let me say it was set aside by the Court of Appeal. And therefore, we will say that as we speak, Gachagua has no impeachment on him to that extent.
Okay, one more question. So then was his presidential bid, his announcement yesterday, was it premature, for lack of a better word?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
It was. He may be shocked that the return will be the same. He may also be shocked. Okay, we may be shocked that the return is different. So it depends on how this, because the case is yet to be heard. And remember, it has been taken back to the High Court.
Yeah.
The High Court will hear it. No pressure anymore, because then there was pressure.
Yeah.
Now it will be heard in a space of availability of time where lawyers are going to argue and judges will take the time to make the decision. Then, and with a background of knowledge of already arguments that have been presented, there won't be different arguments. The papers that were filed remain the same. All right? The arguments remain, the context remains the same. It's just that now there's space and latitude. Then now, after that, remember, parties will go to the Court of Appeal, whichever the results. Then there's the Supreme Court. So we are in it still.
Okay.
Yes.
But we're likely to see the whole process being rushed because it's a matter of,
Public interest?
Yeah.
Was a matter of public interest.
No,
For
it's
now,
not.
I don't think Kindiki wants it rushed. I don't think so.
Politics.
As he occupies the office. But the flip side of it, Rigathi Gachagua would want it rushed because he wants probably to get the decision earlier before the general election. In fact, good space enough for him to make his political decision as to where he's vying or what coalition he's presenting. But also what it does for purposes of the optical sense of it, it gives Rigathi Gachagua some sense of vindication as to the outcry he had. Remember, he took the country through volumes and volumes of his own presentation of his case.
Yes.
And said this is wrong, this is wrong. And I do think that it gives him probably some rendition of, aggrandizement that, I was right all along, and that this was just politics.
Okay.
In fact, the question of believability is what he assumes now, that he can be believed more if you put the two sides, which side then seems to be by the public being believed. And remember this, there are two ways in administration of a country. There's the legality of administration and the legitimacy of administration. Now, legality can be questioned. It's the law that says who should be president, for instance, and which government should run the country.
Yeah.
Legitimacy is whether the people accept the situation as is because of the bounding circumstances. For instance, taxes, economic issues, political issues, issue of abduction. So your legitimacy keeps on going up and down.
Okay.
This presses a question as to the legitimacy of the occupier, of the current occupier, of the deputy president in Kindiki, Professor Kindiki, as to whether he legitimately can pronounce himself before members of the public and present himself legitimately as the deputy president that he represents, me and you and any other person, in the context of the challenges that he faces.
Now to the last part, it is the IEBC. Maze George Kithi anasema yule msee wa Turkana yeye ni below par. Hebu sikiza.
I think the personality of the chair is what surprised me. The rest didn't. First, he's a junior, very junior in law. I mean, my junior too, and that should not be an issue, definitely.
Yeah.
But if you look at the calling of the office, honestly, it calls for experience in matters law, in matters administrative, but more importantly also, it is a calling to a very high office beyond presidency. Because you remember, the president himself will have to present papers before him. He's actually the returning officer of the presidential election. Experience, which means convincing Kenyans to ability and capacity, will be important. I've seen the personalities that were in competition, Amadi, Nechai, for that position. I'm not rooting for any at all. All I'm saying is young people must be given a chance.
Okay.
But merit and experience probably obtains more than what age will give. But of course, age, contextually and ordinarily by parity, would constitute time for purpose of experience. I have seen young judges. I have seen mature older judges. The way they respond to pressure of the time in a context is very different. The balance of, the contextual issues that emerge at that time demands a lot of stability of brain emotions and many other things. So I would say congratulations to him, of course, as he heads to Parliament. But I feel also that he needs to prove a lot, because already there are questions even in the legal profession as to how we got ourselves there. But remember also that maybe it is time the young people are given a chance over time to see what they can do with this country. All we are looking for is impartiality. By the way, it doesn't matter who you put into that office. Let me tell you, if it was me, I'll be looked at within certain contextual background.
Yeah.
What is my tribe? Who have I associated with? Who have I represented before? So on and so forth. And we're looking at, if you walk to Turkana and look at the young man, because he was behind me in law school, and who he's worked with, assuming he's worked for Nanok, Nanok is an ally, then you will be like, okay, that's the connection. So there'll always be a path that forms a thread towards connectivity. But remember, this country, and any society for that matter, there is always a difference. There must be a difference in society among, if it's in a family, you will say the firstborn, secondborn, thirdborn, the differences will be seen. Okay. Like they are night. And then there's the clan, there's the tribe, there's the country. This country must have differences for us to be able to live. It is those differences, economic differences, socio-political differences, that make us what we are, because we are human beings created with differences. But most importantly with this, that we are predetermined for separation in differences, the societal fissures among us, on account of very many issues. There are issues that separate us, but there are dominant issues that also separate us. Ethnicity is probably the most dominant issue that separates us. Yeah. Meaning you must come from a certain background. Be Asian, be Taita, be Turkana, be Luo, be whatever it is. When then you are appointed and you come from a certain ethnicity, that becomes an issue for discussion and an issue to be able to, an issue for debate as to what will be the bias in the circumstances. If you look at the constitution of an empanelment or constitution of the IBC right now as proposed, you would look at the ethnic composition, and then you'll be able to forebode what then will be the bias in the context of opposition and government. Okay. And that's why that debate cannot stop and will not stop. Even after the outcome, still the debate will be tied into the outcome. And therefore, what I say is, we're damned to the extent that we must see, we must live in the context of differences, because that's what we're predestined to do. For instance, we have put it into law, recognize ethnicity, and you say you can't compose a government of one ethnic group. For instance, it doesn't matter whether it's meritorious or not. Yeah. The reason is that is forbidden by law. Democracy itself is even worse. Democracy presupposes numbers. The more the ethnic group, the more the pressure they have that can sustain resources to their end on account of the numbers that they behold, because that's what democracy portends in the first instance. So we are socialized to numbers, and election is about numbers, and the outcome is about numbers, and the numbers are presided over by somebody who constitutes the numbers too. And therefore, where do we run to? We must live with agreement that even in those differences, we must sanitize ourselves to the Puritan approach, or probably we keep guessing that something good will come out.
That was today's analysis of what is happening in the political sphere.